If you'd like to earn CPE credit for listening to this episode, visit earmarkcpe.com. Download the app, take a short quiz, and get your CPE certificate. Continuing education has never been so easy. And now, on to the episode. I have the privilege to be joined today by the hosts of the Oh My Fraud podcast. We've got Greg Kyte. Greg, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Your shoulder holding up?
It is. I'm slingless today. I had shoulder surgery 4 weeks ago, and I'm supposed to be in a sling for 2 more weeks, but I'm turned into a horrible patient. So
Fantastic. Well, I'm glad you're feeling better. And we've also got Caleb Newquist, the other host of the Oh My Fraud podcast.
Hey, hello, everybody. Great to be here.
We are so excited to be presenting to you today, to be talking to you about government frauds, because I'm a producer of the Oh My Fraud podcast, and I think we are now up to over 60 episodes. And across those 60 episodes, there are at least 7 that focus specifically on government fraud. I went through the archives. I found municipal fraud. I found military fraud. I found lottery fraud. And we're going to talk about all of those frauds today. School district fraud, let's not forget that. What they have in common, what government accountants can learn from them, hopefully how we can prevent and stop these frauds perhaps from occurring in the future. So, Greg, Caleb, I want to get right into this. And I think we have to start with the grandmother of all frauds when it comes to municipal fraud, the case of Rita. What was it?
Rita Crundwell.
Rita Crundwell. The case of Rita Crundwell in Dixon, Illinois, a town with a population of 15,000 people. One woman, Rita Crundwell, managed to pull off the largest municipal fraud in history, stealing over $53 million.
Yeah.
And this is one that our, attendees today, our listeners may already be familiar with. I want to start with you, Caleb. Can you give me
Sure.
like the most shocking thing about this fraud to you?
I think the most shocking thing about this fraud, and there's lots to choose from, but I think the most shocking thing is how long she was able to carry it on. I think if I recall, she started the fraud in 1990. And by this point, she had been working for the city of Dixon for, keep me honest, Greg, I think she'd been working at the city of Dixon for 20 years by this point.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yep. And then she carried on the fraud for just over 20 years, about 21 years. So I think those are two good things that I think are especially surprising about this case, which is the length of it. 20 years is a long time. Not many frauds almost no frauds go that long. But also I think it's kind of perplexing that she worked somewhere for 2 decades before she started a fraud, and then she spent another 2 decades perpetrating a fraud. That's a very unusual aspect of this case. Continually fascinating, and gosh, I don't know. That's it. The biggest municipal fraud in the history on record is no small feat. So yeah, that's what I got for that.
And what she did with the money is kind of amazing too, because it was so obvious to anyone who lived there that she had a lot of money, or it should have been anyway.
Right.
How many horses did she own, Greg?
Oh, it was a bazillion. She was the premier quarter horse breeder. Really, from what I understand, or one of, at least we can easily say she was one of the premier quarter horse breeders in the entire United States. So she had, it was over, I think it was like 150 horses that she had. And obviously, she was buying and selling. So her inventory went up and went down over time. But I think an interesting thing that you were kind of getting at is we see the biggest behavioral red flag for fraud is someone living beyond their means. So if you're a municipal comptroller, you likely don't have the money to fund some kind of quarter horse breeding empire. But the problem with that, and this was the cover that Rita used, is a lot of people were thinking, oh, she's got all the money because of the quarter horse empire. And that's why she's got, the nice house, all the horses, all the equipment she needs to take care of the horses. But we've seen this in multiple frauds where the question isn't so much like, you can go, okay, how does she have all the money to do the quarter horse stuff? And she's like, the quarter horses pay for that whole thing. The big question is, why in the hell are you still sticking with your $30,000 a year city comptroller job if you're making millions of dollars and you're able to buy just even like the motorhome that she'd tool around in to take care of the horses when she'd go on her exhibitions and stuff is unreasonable amount of money for stuff like that. So and we saw that also in a fruit cake fraud. There's a bakery in Corsicana, Texas, same thing, where the guy said he inherited all this money. That's where he was able to get private jets and do stuff like that. But it's like, so why are you still keeping your $45,000 a year job as a controller for a bakery? So
clearly the love of it, Greg. Clearly the love of it.
Which again, that's probably the answer that they give is it's like, well, I need, I think especially the Corsicana thing is you can go, well, I got all this money. I could just sit around on my butt all day, but I need something to keep me busy. But with Rita Crundwell, she's got so much other stuff to do that it's like, no, you don't, this is a silly thing. But yeah, I guess city pride kept her there. That's probably was her answer. So,
and also perhaps the need to make sure that nobody ever found out about this fraud, because I understand that she created a fake bank account called Reserve Sewer Capital Development Account.
Yep.
To divert the city funds, which is the perfect name for an account that you don't want anyone to look at, right? That has all the crap in it.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
And so she diverted funds into the secret bank account, and then she would intercept the bank statements so nobody knew this thing existed.
Yeah.
And that's how she got caught, is that a city clerk found the statements, right? And said something about it.
Yep. Caleb, you want to take that part of the story?
Yeah. So her colleague, whose name I believe is Kathy Swanson, and she was preparing for, I believe, a presentation to the city council or county commissioners. And when she called the bank for, she needed all the bank statements for all of the city's accounts. The fake account that she had created was a real account, and it was with the same bank as all their other accounts. So when Kathy put in the request for all of the bank statements, the bank sent her all the bank statements, which included the legitimate phony account. And so that's when she was able to see like these large transactions that were coming through. And for example, I remember something like she saw payments for for gasoline, for example, and the city had their own pumps, so like city workers wouldn't have to, they could fill up their work trucks or their work vehicles from a source that the city had for gasoline. And so if that was the case, why would Rita be paying for gas with this account? And so it became
plus sewer systems don't use a whole lot of gas, so that's also kind of a tell.
Yeah, maybe so. But in any case,
there are those diesel powered sewer lines, so you got to keep that into consideration.
So in any case, it became clear rather quickly that something very bad was going on.
Yeah. Plus, the other thing about that, Kathy Swanson, the person who discovered the fraud, worked for Rita. Rita gave her strict, because the other question that maybe people are thinking is, well, why didn't Kathy get these bank statements along, just going to a bank and saying, give me all the statements? That seems like something that should happen all the time. But no, Rita gave Kathy very strict orders where she was like, when you request bank statements, you request specific bank statements and you give them the bank account number. And so just this one time, Kathy was in a big crunch to prepare some reports for a meeting or something like that, and was just like, just give them all to me. I need them all. Don't make me tell you all the account numbers. And which is also weird that it took 40 years 20 years for someone to be in a hurry in Dixon.
Well, it's a small town. Things move at a slightly slower pace, so perhaps that's why. I'm curious to know if you two have any ideas of how a town like this or a city like this that's small could have implemented internal controls to prevent this sort of thing from happening, because that seems to be the main issue with a lot of these frauds. There's
You're exactly right. Internal controls were missing. Rita Crundwell, she could do anything she wanted with any of the finances for the entire city of Dixon, Illinois. So that absolutely was the case. One of the things that we talk about a lot on the fraud is that the city did have a requirement to have an annual audit by an external auditor every year. And that was who was that? It was Gunderson. Who was
at the firm?
Clifton Gunderson.
It was a predecessor to Clifton Larson Allen, which was Clifton Gunderson. Yep.
Yeah. And so, but that's the thing, is so many people look at external audit as an internal control. And right there, you should go, well, it's not, because external audit isn't internal control. But the other thing is, and this is the thing, never expect your internal auditors to catch fraud, because according to the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, only 3% of frauds are caught by the external auditor. Compare that to 7% of frauds that get caught by accident. And you will find out that, think about it. So 7% get caught by accident, 3% get caught by the external auditor, which says mathematically that fraudsters are 4% dumber than external auditors are good at their job. So you're just not gonna, it's not an effective internal control, period. So don't rely on that to catch your fraud. You have to actually have, I mean, the minimum thing, and Caleb, back me up on this. It seems like almost every fraud that we deal with is just basic separation of duties would have prevented the fraud. And that was the case with Rita too.
It comes up on virtually every episode, and I think the stories we've done on municipalities, I think it's the vulnerabilities are just very the vulnerabilities are very acute, like they're very severe. And you have one person, you either have a very small team of people, or maybe it's only or you have a person who, in the case of Rita, in addition to a small team of people, you have one person who controls virtually all of the duties that are required. So doing reconciliations and cutting checks and making approvals and all those things. And so that concentration of control really leaves municipalities and other small organizations vulnerable. And so one of the things that the city of Dixon did in the aftermath of this case is, despite its size, they did implement more, I guess, they have strict adherence to the implemented separation of duties that they eventually put in after the fact. And I mean, of course, that's, by this time it's too late, but it's a hard lesson to learn. But it is a cautionary tale for any municipality or any kind of government organization that's in a similar situation.
Yeah. And the fact that Dixon, Illinois was so small added to the lack of internal controls, because Rita just went to the bank and was like, hey, I need to open another account. And the bank was just like, cool, we know Rita. We know she's the controller for the city. Everybody knows Rita because everybody knows everything. Rita wouldn't want to open an account unless she needed an account. So let's just do it. And that's why it was a secret account. So the bank was actually held liable for some of the loss that Dixon, suffered and had to pay some restitution to the city, because the bank should have just been like, yeah, that's cool, we got to make sure the mayor knows about it. Because the assumption was the mayor knew about it and it was legit, but it wasn't, because again, you've got small town vibes going on there. And I know we're presenting to the Atlanta Association of Governmental Accountants, and Atlanta is one of the smallest cities in the whole country. So it's really true. That's a big takeaway, I think, for anyone who's listening to this.
Well, speaking of small towns, we've got an even smaller municipality. Well, I don't even know if they're a municipality. Anson, Maine, population 2,500. We call them a town in the episode. And the story is about Claudia Viles, the town tax collector, for, another person holding a job for a long time, 33 years.
Yep.
She started before I was born. And in 1982, over $500,000 confirmed fraud, but it could go way more than that because the statute of limitations had expired on a lot of this stuff. So she was only prosecuted for like what, a year of her frauds?
I think it was 7 years of her fraud. So
7 years.
It was $500,000 that they found that she had stolen, a little over $500,000. And yeah, she had held the position. She was elected to the position of city tax collector, which I go, I don't know, maybe it seems like in the Western United States, having any,
an elected tax collector is a bad idea.
Right. Well, like we just call it like the office of the treasury of the state or the county or something like that. Tax collector seems like it's a little bit more archaic of a term. I kind of go, when I think of tax collectors, all of a sudden I'm thinking that's the second favorite profession that Jesus liked to hang out with. So that's how old.
You bring up an interesting point.
That title.
I live in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we're having elections right now, and I'm seeing signs for a CPA who's running for treasurer. And I'm thinking to myself, do we really want the public evaluating the credentials of the person that's going to be the treasurer of our city? Like, is that something that the public is really, able to do? But I guess that's very common.
You mean you mean like by the fact that they're being very explicit that they are a certified public accountant?
Well, I'm just saying, like, the fact that these positions are elected. I mean, you could get somebody in there who doesn't know anything.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, so you're saying the fact that somebody could get that the treasurer position and have zero background in finance or accounting. Yeah, that's a little troublesome. Yeah, for sure.
So do we know if Claudia was is she an accounting professional?
Yes, I think she got her associates in accounting. So she did have some background in that. She was very tech like delayed, I would say. Technology delayed.
Yeah, because the fraud was done with adding machine tapes.
Yeah, and typewriters. Yeah, she was not using a computer at all for her job until like what was it, 2012, I think. Yeah. So yeah, and it's kind of like I was teaching. So in a former life I was a middle school math teacher, and 2012 our kids all had to know, like children knew how to use computers. So, the fact that someone in an official capacity within the municipality wasn't using one at all, is a little boggling. So
there's something interesting about this fraud, in addition to those tapes, which is that Claudia was known as the Mother Teresa of Anson.
Absolutely.
Is that a name you gave her?
Unofficially, I think that's unofficial.
Yeah. Hopefully it's 6. Yeah, I think we made the comparison.
So this raises another interesting theme that a lot of the frauds you talk about on your show have in common, which is that they are perpetrated by often very charismatic people who are beloved in the communities in which they operate.
Yeah.
And so tell me about Claudia and like how there's people that still think she's innocent, right?
Yeah, and she still claims innocence herself, which is very interesting. But she, which I guess people wouldn't claim that she's innocent if she didn't claim she was also innocent. But what was interesting with her case is when that went to court, she had about 50 people from the city of Anson who submitted letters to the court that were backing Claudia's character. And they gave all these like amazing stories of her just being a wonderful person, from, like just caring for people who were going through tragic times. Like, she would take dinner to people who were suffering from cancer. She would organize like road trips with some other people in Anson where they would go somewhere and just do service projects. It's like, hey, let's go somewhere and plant flowers or stop homelessness, or they weren't specific what the service projects were, but that's the kind of person she was. And she went out of her way to even help people because city tax collector, what she did is she basically collected registrations, like Caleb, what was it, for airplanes and cars and
RVs.
motorhomes. Yeah. Yeah.
A
So,
lot of recreational stuff.
right.
Yeah.
And again, you're going, it's a city of 2,500 people. So I'm doubting she collected a lot of airplane registrations for that. So it's basically car registration. But they've got these stories of people coming over to her house on Christmas Day because they noticed that their tags were expired. And she was like, cool, come on in, have a muffin. I'll I'll take care of your tags. So she went above and beyond to take care of the city, to do her job and to take care of the constituents, I guess. Maybe not take care of the city since she was stealing $500,000, arguably much more than $500,000.
She's a
But
constituent too. She's taking care of herself,
she
right?
she
That's
was taking care of one constituent for sure. For sure.
well,
But she even had this idyllic, like people were talking, like her husband was like, we're madly in love. She's my best friend. Without her, I couldn't do, and I know her better than anyone, and there's no way she could do this. So, I mean, it was really this glowing picture. And one of the striking things about this to me, and we cover this in the episode, is again, going back to the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners report to the nation where they cover tons of statistics about fraud, is they claim that 15% of fraudsters exhibit no red flag behaviors, like living beyond your means, or having family problems, or having some kind of addiction problems, or having a wheeler dealer attitude. Like they list probably 25 different red flag behaviors. And I've seen that for years, for multiple reports where they say some people have, like Caleb, we always joke about it, it's like irritability, defensiveness, and suspiciousness.
Yes.
Those three adjectives are one of the red flag behaviors. And I'm like going, that's me every day.
Yeah. If anyone on the broadcast today isn't exhibiting any of those behaviors daily,
right.
then
right.
I guess we won't be looking to you for fraud.
Right.
Well,
right.
Claudia wasn't, right? She was,
Right.
everyone
Right,
loved her.
right. Like,
She was, and that was the thing. So it was kind of cool, I thought, to go, okay, we actually did find one person who seemed to be exhibiting none of the red flag behaviors of fraud, which again is why so many people had her back and were like, we don't believe this possibly could have happened with Claudia.
Before we move on from Claudia,
Yep.
I want to understand the nature of this fraud a little bit and how maybe an internal control could have prevented it. I'm assuming it's going to be, again, that there was not separation of duties. Caleb, do you remember the details of this? Like, what was she doing with the adding machine tapes?
Well, what she was doing is like, she was making the collections, and Greg, keep me honest, but like she was making the collections, and then the tapes were basically the tapes they did not include the amounts that she was setting aside for herself.
Well, not,
so
yeah, yes and no.
But the total would match the expected total, but the numbers, the actual deposits were made would not. And so the tape would just show you the expected total. And we talk about this in the episode, but essentially, if an audit had been conducted, and I don't remember the regularity of the audits of the tax collector's office, but if anyone would have footed the tape, they would have realized that the math didn't work. So if the math doesn't math, then you would, of course, investigate further, but that never happened. And so that was how she was able to hide it, which is really remarkable because she was able to hide it for so long. It's kind of, again, talk about mind-boggling. That is,
so an audit should have caught this.
An audit would have hopefully easily have caught it, simply in like the most basic of procedures too, which is just to, if you get as everyone on the call probably knows, when you get a document from a client, one of the first things that you do is you foot that schedule, right? You add it up, or you redo the math, right? And that, in this case, if they would have added up the tapes, they would have realized that the math didn't work.
But again, like we said, you can't trust the external auditor to do the job of implementing internal controls. The other problem is she was the one who collected the payments, and obviously, especially when we're talking someone who didn't use a computer, obviously there was going to be plenty of checks, and I don't think she could have done that. But I imagine the money she took was the cash payments that she skimmed that off of there. But again, there was no internal controls, because that's one of the basic things is you have one person do the recording of the accounting. You have another person who handles the assets. And when you're talking about cash, you definitely need to have those in two. Somebody different needs to take care of cash than the person who's doing the accounting. So she was doing both. So it was right there. And again, she had that position for over 30 years. She only got in trouble for the last 7 years, 6 to 7 years of that job. And you kind of wonder how long she was taking cash payments until she was like going, you know what? I could just pocket that part. And that's, like I said, so eventually that's what she did. And again, because no internal controls.
And there's no reason not to have at least that separation of duties. Separate whoever handles the cash from whoever handles the reconciliations. And
we talked about this. We talked about this. I think it was in the, I don't remember if it was the Rita Crundwell episode, but we've talked about it where it's like, you don't necessarily, I think, and I don't know, maybe people have different opinions about this, but like the separation of duties, you don't have to have like finance or accounting experts doing certain duties so long as they are, as long as they sit with different people. So for example, in the in the case of Dixon, the mayor, for example, could have been required to, or someone else, someone who's not Rita, could, the requirement could have been that someone else had to approve all of the payments that were being made.
Yeah.
And that is something that anyone can do. Someone can review a list of transactions, like here's all the checks that I need to cut this week. And someone in some kind of administrative role could just be like, could review it and say, okay, all good. As long as they are committed to the act of the monitoring of the review and just asking questions, like saying, I've never seen this vendor before. What is this? And just asking simple questions like that. Something like that could be enough to deter someone from ever trying anything. And that's that. And again, no one needs to be a finance expert or an accounting expert. They can just be someone whose duty it is to review those things, ask questions when things look different than they're used to seeing, or just asking lots of questions in general about the payments that are being made.
And the excuse is, and the excuse is valid for a city like Anson, Maine. Like you said, it's never topped 2,500 people on any census ever. So it's a tiny town. So they go, we just don't have the resources to be able to implement internal controls. And it's like, but you do, you know, and also because if with $500,000 that you lost, you could have easily paid someone to just do the cash deposits.
Right.
Kind of
For
thing.
so I'll just bring up one like real life example from my own experience, which is my mom used to work in the treasurer's office of the county where I grew up in central Nebraska. It's like my hometown in central Nebraska is basically Anson, Maine. It's like the population is the same. It has never been over 3,000 people. Same kind of like, essentially fact pattern. And in that treasurer's office, if memory serves me right, there were at least 3 people working in that treasurer's office. My mom, and then at least 2 others, maybe 3. And this was at the courthouse in the town square, like Americana, like total Americana. And I just remember it's like, and when I think about that, and I think about, what you just pointed out, Greg, is like, oh, well, we don't have the resources to do separation of duties. I'm like, there's 3 people working in Valley County, Nebraska treasurer's office.
Right.
Collecting and doing all these things. Like there's got to be someone go down to the clerk's office, or go down to the county attorney's office or somebody and just ask them to review the checks that somebody wants to cut. I mean, there's someone somewhere that could fulfill that duty.
And even even updated says one last thing, even updated systems like can be an internal control, because that's what caught Claudia Viles. Was they eventually were like, hey, you need to use a computer. Here's some software. And then all of a sudden they're going, wait a second, the numbers in the computer don't match the numbers in the bank. And then it was over. That was all it took.
Was it.
So yeah. So even sometimes it's just invest in systems or invest in some technology, and that could also do it.
All right, we got more frauds to cover. I'm going to let you guys choose the next one. Do you want to do the lotto fraud, or do you want to do the Navy contracting fraud?
Oh, I love the Navy contracting fraud. Is that okay, Caleb?
It's fine. Of course.
We'll get to both. We'll get to both. Fat Leonard. Fat Leonard. Fat
Fat
Leonard.
Leonard.
Was he known by his friends and family as Fat Leonard, or is that something that you guys came up with?
Oh no, that's
Oh.
definitely that was his nickname that was used throughout because he was a contractor to the Navy, so he was a Department of Defense contractor, and everybody was like, yeah,
That's
Fat
everyone
Leonard.
called him Fat
Yeah,
Leonard. That's
and he
admirals
was-
are calling him Fat Leonard.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Like,
Francis, what is it? What's his? And now I won't even. Francis Leonard Gibson, I think, was his full name.
That was his name.
So,
Leonard
yeah.
Glenn Francis.
Leonard Glenn Francis. There you go. So Fat Leonard. And he
So-
well, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I was just going to give the details of this fraud, right? He ran a company
Yeah.
called Glenn Defense Marine Asia, provided
Mhm.
services to U.S. Navy ships in Asian ports, and he engaged in a massive bribery and corruption scheme that lasted for years, involving numerous high-ranking U.S. Navy officers. Something shocking about this, it's the first time an admiral was he convicted. An admiral was
Yes.
convicted on
Yes.
federal charges for bribery.
Yeah.
And I'll let you guys discuss the scheme. How did Fat Leonard skim his unfair share of taxpayer dollars?
Right. You want me to take to handle this
Well,
one?
I
Caleb?
can talk about it just in real general sense. Like this,
Yeah.
this was one of Greg's favorites, and so
Yeah.
I'll get in some words while I can. But one of the main things that he did was that he did everything for when these ships would come to port. Like there's all these things that they need, right? And the one that is so memorable to me is that they needed water. So
Yeah,
they would
fresh water.
Yeah, they would need fresh water. So on the ships. And they're not gonna like dock it right next to, you know, the water station where they bring in the pit. So they have to have little dinghies or whatever that, you know, travel back and forth and to carry supplies. And one of the things was fresh water, and he would charge for these services, right? As a contractor, he was like, they would arrange to have certain services performed, and he would do them. Security, you name it. And but what ended up happening was that he would invoice for these services, and he would be charging exorbitant amounts for these services when compared to like what they were, you know, being charged elsewhere. So they're, I don't know, 2 or 3 times. Greg, do you remember the details of the water one? It seemed like that there was some very specific details about that.
Yeah.
Where someone was reviewing it and said, this is impossible. The ship can't hold as much water as you're saying that you brought us.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. That was one of the, which was one of the many times that that something like that surfaced and was then just flatly ignored, where it's like, just shut up and don't worry about it and pay the invoice. Because here's the way that Fat Leonard was able to give these inflated invoices was, first off, dude was amazing at what he did. He got these, they were called Bravo Zulus, which were like letters of commendation from high-ranking people within the Navy, because he did such a great job. Because he did a great job. He did a lot of dirty work that the Navy just didn't want to do when their people were at foreign ports. So like he would have like, and just to prep everybody, some of this is super cringy and not really easy to hear, but like you'd have sailors who would be on shore for R&R time because they'd been at sea for whoever knows how long. They'd get in some huge bar fight, or they'd be taken to jail for some sort of sexual assault, and the Navy would be like, we need those guys out of there, but we don't want to be the ones who are paying off the local police to get our people out of the hoosegow. So Fat Leonard would be like, I got you. And he'd go and he'd take care of it, and he'd just add it to his invoice. And they'd be like, that's awesome. We don't want to get our hands dirty. This is a guy who'll get his hands dirty for us. That's amazing. And then, so he was already providing services above and beyond what would be expected, to the delight of the officers. But then this was a big thing that worked in his favor, is he had two tragedies that helped him immensely. One was the USS Cole attack. I don't know if you guys remember that, but that was when a little tiny boat went up to a big old, Navy ship. And again, I'm sure that in my mind, I'm sure what's happening is that people on the ship were going, get your boat away from us, or we will have to open fire on you. But again, it's not going to look awesome if it's like they didn't turn around, so we blew them up, and it's like, yeah, that was a fishing boat full of fishermen and fish. So this boat's coming closer and closer, and eventually, and the thing that in this case it was full of plastic explosives, blew a hole in the side of the ship, killed a bunch of sailors, and because you've got these naval ships that have to dock at just commercial ports sometimes, and so that's what happened with the USS Cole. So all of a sudden there's this need for security for Navy ships while they're at commercial ports, and so Fat Leonard, he's like, I got you, and he starts doing this thing called the Ring of Steel, I think he called it. Where he eventually, I mean, it started off a little bit more prosaic than this, but it eventually was 4 barges that formed a rectangle and steel cables between the barges. You'd open up the cables, the Navy ship would go in, and then basically nobody's allowed. And again, like Caleb said, he provided security, so they would have ships going around the perimeter, so the Navy didn't have to turn ships away. These Fat Leonard's guys would. So again, it took care of him. He even had frogmen who would dive underneath to make sure there was no explosive planted underneath his ring of steel.
Wow.
And then 9/11 happened, and then everybody was like, whatever it takes to protect our troops, here's all the money. So Fat Leonard was like, I'll do whatever it takes to protect your troops. Give me all the money. So that was part of it. He was amazing at what he did. But then the other thing is he grew up on the docks in an emerging economy. Bribes were commonplace for him. That was just how you did business for where he was at in the world. And so he started using that same marketing technique with Navy officers, where it started with, here's some cigars, here's a nice dinner. He loved to wine and dine people so that the officers would be like, hey, we're in the Pacific Ocean. Where should we dock our ships? Hey, I know this great guy named Fat Leonard. He'll take good care of us. Let's go there, because they got, they would get cash, they'd get trips. I mean, it was just he like lavished gifts on these people. Fun fact, in the armed forces, at least at this time, maybe it's been raised for inflation, but this time you could only accept gifts up to $20 of cash value. He's given these guys Michelin star meals, which are hundreds of dollars per plate, which that alone is blowing up your $20 limit.
Okay. Well, I want to say that brings us to the crux of this fraud, which is inflated invoices. He's overcharging the military. The admirals are happy to pay these bills because they're getting kickbacks. Their people are happy. He's providing a really, valuable service to them personally.
Yeah.
But not okay to do that, right?
No.
With taxpayer money. So like, what control was put in place after this, or could have been put in place to catch and detect this sort of thing?
So the funny thing is there were controls in place already. And that was I mean, you had people who were bringing up going, hey, this isn't right. These invoices are not correct. So really, and you had, what was it, Caleb? I think the number's 27 cases that were presented to the NCIS, the Naval Criminal Enforcement Service, or whatever. Investigative service. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Enforcement doesn't start with an I, does it? I'm a genius.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they were there. I mean, really, it's in
The
terms of
the corruption went pretty deep, I think, is what Greg is getting at.
So it was being detected.
The controls were being circumvented.
Okay.
And so so that's why the conspiracy, that's why there were so many, like,
it was
right.
It was a
it went to
broader
the top.
conspiracy. Yeah.
Because management override of controls is something that happens all the time.
Essentially what it was.
So maybe if there'd been like a whistleblower who'd brought this up publicly and gone to Congress or something, it could have gotten caught.
Right.
And there finally was a whistleblower. Who wouldn't shut up. And so it was case number 28 with the NCIS that finally went through. So,
all right.
Yeah.
Well, I got to keep us moving along. We got to talk about lottery fraud, because this one I think might be a little trickier to detect, because it involved the rigging of an electronic lottery. The episode is called "A Lotto Fraud: Eddie Tipton and the Multi-State Lottery Association." And Eddie Tipton, former security director of the Multi-State Lottery Association, rigged the Hot Lotto game to win a $16.5 million jackpot in 2010 which raised suspicions when a trust in Belize claimed it at the last minute. Yes, that does seem a little bit suspicious. Investigators identified Tipton as the ticket buyer through surveillance video. Oops. He had programmed the random number generator to produce predictable numbers on certain dates. And he'd been doing this since 2005, with his brother Tommy and friends also claiming rigged jackpots. So he got away with it for 5 years, it sounds like. This seems like it would be really difficult for any accountant to detect, given that he had programmed the random number generator to not be so random. Like, how do you control for that? I'm curious to, get your take on this. Is there any other salacious details of this fraud that we should share with our audience today?
Yeah, there's tons. I mean, they did have controls in place with the Multi-State Lottery Association, but
by the way, what states are we talking about?
Oh gosh, I wish I could tell you. It was I think there was 13 different states that specifically had the Hot Lotto lottery, but and it was California. I want to say Oregon was one of them, but yeah, it's just this, kind of
a lot of states.
Kind of a scatter shot of different states, because again, the way that a state well, like for instance, what was it? I one of my hobbies, I love buying lottery tickets when I'm out of state, because I live in Utah, and Utah does not have a state lotto because we're far too pious for that here in the state of Utah. But I've won the lottery in 14 different states, including Georgia. I've won the Georgia state lottery for, I believe, $2, and I have the check. It's been laminated and it's up on my wall. That's those are my souvenirs I get when I travel, is lottery, very small dollar lottery winning checks. But I went to Wyoming, and I was up there, and I wanted scratchers, because that's the easiest way for me to get my small dollar lottery winnings. They're like, we don't do scratchers. All we do is Powerball and Mega Millions, like the big ones, because they're like, apparently the little ones are how people get gambling problems, and the big, I don't know what the clerk couldn't really explain why the Wyoming was so weird like that. But different states, buy into different lottery associations with different frequencies and regularities and different games and everything like that. So he specifically rigged this one game. But part of the problem and part of how he did that was he was the guy who wrote the program for these digital draws. So this wasn't balls in a wind tunnel that it gets sucked out of a tube. This was a digital draw kind of thing. So he wrote the program, and not a lot of people understand the program. And he was even able to send, like, there's certain documents that you have to send in to another corporation to back up that your stuff was really random. And he just did the kind of like Rita Crundwell. She faked invoices to cover her tracks. This guy basically faked reports to send into those guys, and they just didn't, and even like Claudia Viles, they didn't do the equivalent of footing the tapes with the reports that he sent in. But he was a highly, highly specialized guy doing a highly, highly specialized job. And he was, like you said, he was head of security. So even whenever he was working on the computer that did these digital draws, there was a camera that was in the room that was watching him and that was recording keystrokes. But he had enough skills to where he could go in and he could orchestrate a glitch in that system for while he's doing the stuff that he's doing to cover his own tracks.
There's no tape for these minutes here. That sort of thing.
Right. Or instead of, it went to where it was just recording, right. You've seen it where it was like a blip every 16 seconds or something like that. So you couldn't really tell what was going on while he was doing the stuff.
So this guy's the security director. He can circumvent all of the systems, all the controls in place in this electronic system.
Most.
So how did he get caught?
It was because it was in okay, now I'm having it was in Iowa.
Iowa.
He was it was in Iowa. Yeah. So in Iowa, they have a bunch of because obviously we all know if you're an employee of the lottery, you can't play the lottery, because that's just, if you win, even if you win completely legitimately, everybody's like, that looks horrible, so you can't play. So he obviously couldn't play these games. But Iowa had additional rules, and maybe this is I guess I never checked to see how common this was that, but I don't think it is very common. The person who buys the ticket has to be the same as the person who claims the ticket. So he bought the ticket and he's on camera at this, because, and again, Iowa seems like it went above and beyond to have to make sure cameras were installed. They had access to security cameras at all the convenience stores in the whole state where they sell these lottery tickets. So they were able to look at the tape and identify that it was him doing it. But then it wasn't a crime that it wasn't a crime. It wasn't criminal for him to buy the ticket. It was just against the rules for him to win the lottery. But what was a crime was him then passing the ticket on to somebody else to try to work its way out. So there was all these red flags, and the main source we had was actually a book written by one of the DAs, I think, for the state of Iowa, who worked the case, who he was like, everybody thought this was a stupid thing and that it wasn't worth our time, because you're looking at law enforcement has a limited time, limited budget. But eventually he just dug his teeth into it and wrote it all the way till he found what was happening.
Well, so this is a good example of why perhaps those transparency laws, like in Iowa, around winners of lotteries are important, because if the public doesn't know who the winner is, how do you know that there wasn't fraud involved? And I think we could broaden this potentially to all sorts of different types of enterprises or government situations where, in addition to having good internal controls, you should also have a system that is transparent, like audit trails, right?
Absolutely.
Great example of that. You can have an audit trail in any electronic program that should never be changed, right? Like
that anyone can review at any time.
Right.
Right.
And that's basically kind of what Iowa's system is, in a sense. Like, we know who the winner is, so we can question their motives, perhaps.
Yep.
And in other states where that's not required, he never would have gotten caught.
Right. And that was the thing. Even like so he was able to have his brother buy tickets in Colorado, I think it was. And because again, he knew the information, so he just passed the information to his brother, and his brother bought the ticket. And it was only in hindsight that it was like, oh, again, through this transparency, which was in Colorado, where the investigators could go, who's what, like they started, send a letter around to all the state lottery divisions going, hey, is anybody have any, weird transaction, weird winners, and or winners that line up with this name or that have anything to do with this. And somebody was like, oh, here, we have one, here you go. Which again was a little bit of luck, but also, like you said, it was because of transparency that they had that information available.
So in the time we have left, I want to address the biggest fraud that is on our list. And I'm only giving you like 5 minutes to do it, guys. So this is a real challenge here. Okay. We're going to talk about pandemic fraud. Now, I don't think we need to educate everyone on pandemic fraud, because we've all heard about it. PPP fraud, EIDL fraud, ERC fraud.
Yeah.
I just want to get your takeaways, having lived through this over the last however many years now. Like, what are your biggest takeaways from the pandemic fraud stories that you have covered? Or another option is just tell us some of the craziest things you've seen people do with the money, or both.
Yeah.
Caleb, what's your favorite?
I think, well, I love a good corrupt politician. So the representative, the state rep in Florida, Joseph Harding, I believe his name is.
Yeah.
He that story was delicious and satisfying, and he had been in office. I believe he'd been elected to the Florida State House, and had been in his had been serving for about a month when he started he started an EIDL fraud. He submitted bogus paperwork about his businesses. And I think the other aspect of that story that was interesting was his brother-in-law went even bigger, and had millions in PPP and EIDL and other pandemic aid fraud. And so yeah, I love a good corrupt politician story. I think, in terms of takeaways, I think one thing that Greg and I have talked a lot about is, having all experienced the pandemic the way we all did, I think we all kind of remember kind of the early days and thinking about how crazy it all was, how uncertain everything was, and how much we didn't know, not only about just, the virus, but also, businesses being shut. Like, how are people going to make ends meet? How are they going to keep their businesses going? And so I think the kind of the fast moving legislation that provided the aid, that was the avenue that we took. But the alternative, and now we have, in the resulting of it, is that lots of people got aid that needed it, but then we have this big fraud, and we talk about all these big fraud stories. But I think it's probably, it's at least arguable, and Greg would probably say it's true, that the alternative, which would have been worse, which is that we didn't provide aid to people, we didn't provide aid to businesses, and the economic kind of consequences of that would have been far more severe than the amount of fraud that we're seeing, for example. So I think that is I don't envy, I guess, the people in the positions of power who have to make those kinds of calls,
Right.
and basically have to be held accountable on either side of it. And I think because the fraud is a massive problem, but not providing aid to people who desperately needed it would have been probably worse. So
So
it's
to summarize your position,
a rock and a hard place. Yeah.
Billions of dollars of fraud, but worth it because we prevented a terrible recession.
I mean, yeah. I don't know. I mean, maybe someone smarter than me could say, well, this is how we would have navigated it, but I don't see how we would have navigated that without providing the aid.
Well, they're trying to thread the needle of going, okay, we don't want to be fast and sloppy, but we don't want to be overly slow and we can't be overly slow and overly precise. And
Right.
so that's why, if all of us who were in public accounting or did anything with PPP, that we remember that it was like we'd have clients calling us saying, hey, so do I qualify? And it's like, today you do, or how much do I and what can I spend the money on? Well, here's what you can do right now. There could be another press release in an hour that changes this. And and the reason why there was all those adjustments was not just that they were trying to make sure that people got relief that would actually be relief, but was also to try to prevent people from committing fraud. Like I remember with the loans that I'm a controller, in-house controller for a group of medical office buildings. And so we got two different LLCs, each got a PPP loan. It was pretty small because we have a small staff and it was based on staff. But I remember one of the things is you had to submit your 941s, your payroll tax to support how much money you were actually paying to employees. And I go, well, right there, I put them in. They can go double check to make sure I didn't fabricate these. And then anybody who's lying is going to get caught right there. But there's so many people who don't care, and they just are like, I want cash now, and if I get it, I win, and the consequences be damned. And that's who stole the money.
That seems to be how all this money was obtained fraudulently. Is they just made up tax returns, just filled out the forms with fraudulent businesses, employees, and there was not a verification that occurred on the other side.
Right.
And the argument that I think Caleb made very well, succinctly, is that there wasn't time to do all that verification. Right? Who was gonna actually compare?
Right.
Right.
And there is time now, and people are doing it now because there's this uproar of how much money was stolen.
But in the meantime, Vineeth, who bought a $58,000 Pokemon trading card with his $85,000 idle loan, I mean, I don't know if the government's going to be able to sell that Pokemon card for $58,000.
Not if he took it out of the case.
Yeah, did he play with it? I mean,
right.
Come on. Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, Caleb and Greg, thank you so much for doing this roundup of government frauds. Any big takeaways that you want to leave the audience with? These are government accountants who want honest, transparent government that handles taxpayer funds fairly, honestly. What can you offer them from your 60 plus episodes of Oh My Fraud. How can we be better?
I would say, one of the big takeaways that I think is huge for everyone is basically the concept of professional skepticism. It's trust but verify, and also maybe don't trust. That's what I say professional skepticism is, because we see that with Rita Crundwell in Dixon, is that people just, she was in the job for a long time. She was very knowledgeable. She knew all the numbers, even if they were her own fraudulent numbers. She knew them backwards and forwards. So people just gave her a pass, and they didn't scrutinize her to the level that they should have. Same with Claudia Viles in Anson, Maine. She was incredibly trustworthy, and so people just gave her a pass, and they didn't. You have to go, someone here is maybe stealing money from this organization. So when you stop, stop just implicitly trusting people and verify everything that you can.
How about you, Caleb?
I mean, Greg and I talk about that a lot, which is be more cynical. I mean, that's I think probably my cynical take. I think my more optimistic take is just thank you to all the people that are committed to public service in this way, because it really is important work, and you're all like kind of unsung heroes in the sense of being a CFO or a comptroller or a controller or whatever role it is in finance and accounting for state, local, and federal governments. Like, a lot of that stuff is really, like I said, kind of, you guys are unsung heroes for all of us taxpayers. And so thank you for your service, and thank you for doing the work. I mean, I think there's a lot of good work to be done in public service on the finance and accounting side, and it doesn't get the recognition it deserves.
Greg and Caleb, I think that's a great way to wrap this. I am Blake Oliver. I've been speaking with the hosts of the Oh My Fraud podcast, Greg Kyte and Caleb Newquist. Subscribe to Oh My Fraud by going to ohmyfraud.com/subscribe. You can find it on all major podcast platforms, as well as YouTube. And you can earn free CPE, free NASBA CPE, for your CPA license renewal or CMA renewal or enrolled agent renewal. You can do that at earmark.app. Create a free account, locate the Oh My Fraud channel on the Earmark app, register, and earn a free CPE. Just take a quick quiz after you listen to each episode. And there's 60 plus episodes now, so you can get all of the CPE you need. And a lot of it's accounting, because fraud is accounting. Get your A&A requirement out of the way with Oh My Fraud. So that is, again, ohmyfraud.com and earmark.app.